All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another fantastic episode of the Food Fight Show podcast. I'm Nell Shamrell Harrington, and with me, as always, is my co host, Mr. Nathan Harvey.
Hey, Nell, how's it going today?
Going great. I hear that your views do not represent the views of your employer. Is that correct?
That is indeed correct. My views do not represent the views of my employer, and I should remember to say that at the beginning of every episode. But I'm super stoked to be back on the show. Really excited for our topic today and our guest, and always a good chance to catch up with you now.
Fantastic. Well, we're glad to have you here too. And we are joined by our guest, Mary Thengvall. Now, did I say that right? I worked with you for years, but I'm still not sure how to say your last name.
You said it correctly, so you're
Yay!
good. No worries.
All right. All right. 10 points to me.
Yes.
But anyway, today's topic is developer relations. Mary, I hear you have a new book out on the subject.
I do. It's been an exciting few months. Just released the book, The Business Value of Developer Relations, back at the end of October, so just over a month now. It's good. It's a surreal feeling to have something that you've written out in the real world. But it's been a lot of fun.
Well, fantastic. Well, congratulations on the book. I'm officially calling it the Avocado book now. I love the cover. I know that book writing is an intensely emotional and draining process. So, very well done. Well, with
Thank
that,
you.
let's dive into the topic. So, Mary, what is developer relations?
That's a good question, and it's one that I hear a lot. So to me, at its foundation, the purpose of developer relations, or Devrel, as people call it, is to build relationships with the developer community. And that sounds fairly basic, but I keep it fairly basic because it can encompass a lot of different things depending on the goals of the company, depending on the goals of the team, and depending on your technical or developer audience.
Yeah, so that's one question that I have for you immediately, because I've been in a bunch of conversations about this recently. As you said, it's to build relationships with the developer community.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you describe a developer? I'm a sysadmin,
Right.
so I'm not a developer, am I?
Right. So that's something that I've actually been working on. It's been interesting since the book came out, and I've been working with a few different clients about this as well. I think I use developer generically to include everyone and anyone who could touch code in any way whatsoever, whether you're a sysadmin, whether you're ops, whether you're front end or back end developer, whether you just graduated from college, whatever your level of technical person is. But I've also started using technical community or technical audience a little more recently, because then it eliminates any of that confusion around like, well, our audience isn't developers, it's DevOps people. Like, well, it's okay, it's not the same thing. You're right. And I shouldn't say it's the same thing because people might get offended by that, but it's
For
the people.
sure. I think, as you look at the people that are practicing technology, like the technical practitioners, if you will, today, it does span, of course, beyond developers into folks that identify as system administrators or operators or site reliability engineers, but also into, if you look at sort of the trends, there's things like machine learning and AI and big data. So what about data scientists and like the people that are helping build ML models and things like this? Like, these folks absolutely are technical. The work that they do is technical. They're technical in nature. And I don't know, like, maybe this isn't a surprise, but I believe that they would benefit from being and identifying with part of a community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's an interesting conversation that I've had lately too, is, okay, so you're talking developer relations, but a lot of these principles are community building principles. And community building, community management has been around for a while now because of open source communities and because of people building communities around products and everything else. So like, why is DevRel suddenly this new thing? And it's like people say, a lot of the concepts are similar or exactly the same as building any type of community at all. I think the difference is there are certain things that are geared specifically toward technical audiences, right? Having tooling that can be built to help them do their job better, or having technical people on the developer relations team, on the community team, who understand those problems, who understand those issues, who can better identify with the things people are going with. So it's the same as any other type of audience who's trying to build a community, any other type of business who's trying to build a community. But given that it's developer focused, there's certain nuances that go along with that technical side of things.
Awesome.
And sorry, I just want to interrupt really quickly. This feels like a commercial break here. But if you are watching our live stream and you have questions for Mary or topics that you'd like to bring into this discussion, you can do so by joining us in our Chef Community Slack. You can get there at community-slack.chef.io, sign up there, and then there's a food fight channel there. And of course, you can also tweet to us any questions that you have. Just tweet at Food Fight Show. And we'll bring those questions in. Sorry, Nell, I just interrupted you. So back to our program.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I'm right. I forgot to announce that, so I'm glad you brought that in. So on the question of, how is this different from I don't know if you can call community building traditional. Well, I guess you can, from community building as we know it. I mean, I've heard the words developer relations, developer advocacy, developer evangelism. I've even heard, though I know this isn't correct, professional conference goer. So my question is, are these different, or are there nuances to them?
Sure. So to me, developer relations is the umbrella term that encompasses developer advocacy, developer evangelism, community manager, all of those types of roles. And there's some nuance between them, especially I would say between advocacy and evangelism, although I know a lot of people will disagree with that statement. But the nuance comes with, developer relations. If we're saying that the purpose is to build those relationships and to help the developer community or technical community that we're serving, then each of those roles fits underneath that umbrella. So developer advocacy, you've got people who, as it says in their name, are advocating on behalf of the technical community. They're bringing information back to the company that they're hearing from the community, and likewise turning around and taking information out to the community that they're hearing from the company. I like to say to the community, we're representing the company, and to the company, we're representing the community. And on both sides of that, we're also amplifying successes from within the community as well. Developer evangelism, I think of as more almost a bridge between developer relations and sales. And they aren't responsible for a sales quota by any means, but they're the people who kind of go out there and position, here's why this product or this idea is important at this point in time. So here's how it fits into the greater technology industry. Here's why it's important. Here's how it's important. And then here's how our product fits into your structure as well. Community management, community building is the actual working with the community of people that you have. And whether that's a super user community or your special internal community group of customers who give a lot of feedback or who are involved in beta testing or things like that, it's the person who kind of oversees any of those customer platforms, super users, whatever, your champion program, all of those types of things that you might call that. You also might see an events coordinator or a project manager. I'm starting to see that pop up more and more. Someone who kind of helps all of the developer relations projects that they have under that umbrella kind of keep going. Keeps everyone on track, keeps everyone heading in the right direction, making sure that everything lines up with the goals, similar to project manager with a technical team. You can also see documentation fall under that umbrella of developer relations. Documentation, training, demos would fall under that as well. You can also see, tutorials or workshops or things like that. So things that all, at the end of the day, help the technical audience do their job better, help them understand the product better, help them be more successful in the things that they're doing through that relationship building side of things, because building those relationships helps you understand the pain points, helps you understand the issues that they're facing, and helps you, of course, better serve their needs.
Awesome. So that, because it encompasses so many different roles working together, I have to ask, is developer relations the new DevOps?
Oh, interesting.
Or it could be part of DevOps, I suppose.
It could. And I think from the sense that DevOps is the let's tear down the walls and build bridges instead, it absolutely is. I actually read an interesting article the other day, and I'll send you the link so we can include it in the show notes. But it was this idea of, instead of building bridges, and I'm going to lose the word that it was, but basically, instead of building bridges, because bridges force you to cross over and there's still that chasm in between, it's the idea of just erasing that chasm entirely. And so not just building the bridges, but actually forming those relationships with the other teams so that there isn't that chasm anymore. So kind of connecting the teams, bringing them together, helping everyone work together, and erasing any of those walls, taking down the walls that might be between teams that aren't necessary and that honestly can actively prohibit you from being able to serve your community's needs.
Yeah, and I think that, when we look at DevOps, there's always collaboration, or when you start practicing DevOps, there's always collaboration within your organization across departments. But I think one of the things that's really exciting for me about the way DevOps is actually practiced in the real world is that collaboration and that sharing goes beyond the four walls of the company that you're working in. And to me, that's a lot about exactly where the space that developer relations works in. Developer relations is in the business of making those connections, bringing those humans together to work with one another to drive towards whatever outcome they're trying to drive towards, whether that's to create political change, because certainly communities happen to change the world, or it's to ship a product faster.
Awesome. So, how is it different from sales and marketing? You mentioned it's kind of a bridge to sales and marketing.
It can be, yeah. So this is a question that is hotly debated among developer relations teams, particularly right now. It's something that I'm seeing come up over and over, but it falls in an interesting space. And that's part of the reason why you can find Devrel teams, some of them under marketing, some under engineering, some under product. We've got all of those types of skills. And so we kind of borrow from product, we kind of borrow from marketing, we kind of borrow from engineering, but we aren't fully doing any of those roles. So it's similar to marketing in that we're doing brand awareness. Anytime we're out in the community talking to folks about who we are and what we do, we're doing some product work when we get product feedback from customers, and we're helping to hopefully implement that and distribute that feedback among the product team to then get it added to the product roadmap. We're doing some engineering if we're involved with building sample applications or demos or tooling to help the community do their job better. And so all of those things come into play. The problem is that a lot of companies then don't know where to put a DevRel team because they don't fit into each of those categories specifically. And when they do wind up deciding what team to put them under, there are times when even if it could be a good fit for that group, they wind up, or they can wind up, I should say, being responsible for similar goals as those departments are. So a DevRel team that reports into marketing could function really, really well. That's where Twilio's DevRel team reports into. But the key is remembering that there are distinct goals for developer relations that aren't the traditional marketing goals, right? So we're not after lead gen. We're not after finding marketing qualified leads or filling the sales pipeline or things like that. We have a very different goal. We have a very different mission. And as long as the team has that very different mission and it's understood on up through the company leadership that mission is important and that the DevRel goals should be related to their mission and then filtering on up, of course, to the company goals and mission, then it can be successful no matter where it is. But that's a difficult line to toe and a difficult thing to make sure can be communicated all the way up.
Yeah, and you've talked about, developer relations doesn't carry a quota. Developer relations isn't responsible for lead generation, or maybe
Right.
isn't, or maybe is. I don't know, is or isn't, depending on the organization, measured on lead generation or MQLs, marketing qualified leads. But Mary, you wrote a book, right? This book is called "The Business Value of Developer Relations." So what what prompted you to write this book? How, tell me the sort of the story of how the book came about, and then I'd also love to just get into how and why technical communities are key to your success.
Sure. So the book started at Scale, Southern California Linux Expo, in
What a
2000.
great conference!
It is. It's a fantastic conference. 2017, I think it started. And it started by actually my getting tapped on the shoulder by Nathan, who in passing said, "I'm so excited that we're working on this project together." And I went, what project? And then in true Nathan form, he tapped me on the shoulder again and said, "I'm so excited," and walked off. And then I was informed by Julie Gunderson that I was now the fourth person in this project to write this book, which was super exciting and super awesome, but also a little bit surprising considering we had never had a conversation about this. We being Nathan and Julie, and Jason Yee was the fourth. But there was this awesome editor, Louise Corrigan, who is with A-Press. She was at Scale that year, and she and Julie had been talking about, we really need developer relations resources. We really need someone to write this book on what's the business value, how do we do this, what does it look like, what should it look like in various companies. And that's really where I kind of went, okay, do I have time to do this? No. Do I want to do this? Yes. Do we need to do this? Absolutely. Because part of the hard thing with Devrel is there's been so many people that have been doing it without really realizing it. And also so many of us doing it without a lot of resources for the better part of the last decade. And I think, and this has come up before in other conversations, I think part of the problem is we've got a lot of really smart people who are capable of a lot of things doing a job that's a lot of fun, but also keeps us so busy that we don't have time to document what we're doing or build the tooling that we desperately need or create the resources that we'd love to have. And so we kind of just keep doing what we're doing because we have to keep up with what we're doing. And so it's part of my goal with my consulting firm, with my company, is to create some of these resources for developer relations professionals because we don't have, or we haven't had them in the past. We're starting to now. But without creating those resources, it's difficult to help other people outside of this growing community understand what is developer relations, how does it work, and ultimately what is the business value of it, and how does that fit in. So that's kind of how the book got started. I wound up doing a lot of it on my own toward the end, just because it's, as you said at the beginning, Nell, it's time intensive and it's stressful and it's a lot of work. And I was the one out of the four of us that had the time that I was able to dedicate to it. But Nathan helped a lot along the way, as did Julie and Jason. And I'm incredibly grateful that that's the way it turned out, because I don't think I ever would have volunteered to write a book on my own, which means it wouldn't be here without you.
Well, I think you're being far too humble. You definitely were part of a team of 4 when this journey began.
Yes.
But 3 of us sort of self-elected ourselves off of the island very, very quickly. And so thank you for seeing the project through. Now, I want to come back to another part of the book that is that maybe makes people scratch their head a little bit, or maybe just makes them hungry. What's up with the avocados?
So the avocados are probably one of my most, I don't know if I'd say one of my most proud moments, but certainly one of the things that I've enjoyed the most that has come out of this. So a few years ago when I was at SparkPost, internally, one of our product managers had a hard time saying developer advocates when she got talking quickly. And we at the time were the developer advocacy team. And she would wind up saying developer avocados in conversation. And so it kind of became this company-wide internal joke of like, all right, fine, developer advocacy is developer avocados. Let's make that quote unquote official. And so we were the avocado team for a long time. But it turned into this analogy for us because I, as a person who loves words, I'm never really happy with just cool, that's what we're calling ourselves. I want a reason and a story behind it and an explanation to give people. And so my colleague, Adrian Howard, and I sat down. He was like, avocados are the good kind of fat. And we both love avocados, and there's got to be an analogy in here somewhere. And so we sat down and kind of hammered out, well, we're the good kind of fat, and we tend to be a quote unquote fatty department, a more expensive department, given, swag usually comes out of Devrel, a lot of sponsorships, travel, exactly. So a lot of these things kind of add up quickly and wind up being the more expensive part of the department, but used in the right ways and the right times and the right combinations of items, it can be a really, really valuable part of the company, and it can provide a lot of value to the community as well. And so we kind of took this avocado analogy and ran with it to the point where there's now a couple different blog posts about it. It's obviously the cover of my book. So we wound up doing avocado versions of each of the people that I did case studies with. So if you see the cover of the book, you'll see Nathan on there. You'll see myself on there. And about 20, I think there's like 25 other folks that we featured throughout the book. So yeah, but it's become a really fun way and a good analogy for explaining to everybody really what developer relations is and the value that it brings to the company. So this idea of, it combines with a lot of things really easily. It picks up the flavors of things around it, meaning that it can be used in different ways at different times. You can have different goals depending on what the goal of the company is. You can be writing documentation or writing blog posts or speaking at conferences or creating a champions community of your customers or all of these different things that can all bring a lot of value and can all bring a lot of good, healthy information back to the company in the form of product feedback, in the form of external brand advocates popping up, people that are so excited about not only your product, but about the way that you're handling community building, that they're willing to talk about it on your behalf at conferences or on their own personal blogs and things like that.
Now, how is developer advocacy different from being a traditional developer? I mean, I imagine there's more community interaction. How would you describe the difference?
I think a big part of it is the community interaction. I think from the people that I've talked to who have been developers and switched into developer advocacy or evangelism or another role within developer relations, part of the thing they don't realize is that there's a lot of things to jump between. So there's not as much of, here is my one project that I am working on, here is the one thing that my focus is on, or the two projects my focus is on. It's, I've got blog posts to write or a talk to give or a webinar to produce. Plus, I've got marketing pinging me, asking me to make sure that this copy is correct. And product is asking me if I've heard back from this community member about their feedback or if I have someone who can beta test these other things. So there's a lot that demands your attention at all times. And that's one thing that anytime any developer comes to me and says, I'm really interested in this whole Devrel thing, how do I know if I'd be good at it? That's my top question is, are you good with context switching? Because if you're someone who needs a lot of focus and who needs a lot of quiet time and who needs to be able to block off their calendar to work on things, don't go into developer relations. Because there's a lot of context switching. And I think that's getting better at some larger companies where it's not as big of an issue because you're not dealing with 12 different priorities at the same time. And we're working on improving that as people are starting to understand things like burnout and the causes of burnout and how we can't focus on 12 priorities at once. But being able to carry on conversations with community members and help many different departments throughout the company and kind of have a say and have your hand kind of in a lot of different places, it takes a special type of ability to go, okay, I was doing this thing over here. Now I need to jump to project B. Now I need to jump back to something I was working on last week while making sure that I'm keeping everything straight in my head. But there's definitely, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, something I think I'm hearing is that it's critical for developer relations to be a core part of the business, not kind of a side place to outsource. Really critical that it be in there where the business decisions are being made.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I think has been lacking because of, honestly, a misunderstanding of what developer relations is and the value that we can bring, is that so often you have developer relations professionals, developer advocates, community managers, what have you, that are brought into the company and told, hey, we're bringing you in because you're an expert in this community. And they're told that they're experts and they're viewed as experts. And then, cool, we're making a decision, the higher ups are making a decision about how to move forward with this particular part of the product. And Devrel wasn't always brought into those conversations. So we're told that we're experts. We're told that, we are the voice of the community, but then we're not always included at the table where those decisions are being made. And that's something that a lot of us are really pushing to change, because that's a very important part of keeping the community involved, and understanding that the community's needs and priorities might not always be the company's needs and priorities. But if the companies are saying, hey, we're listening, we want to be involved, we want to be included, we want to be doing as much as we can to serve your needs, then the developer relations team needs a seat at the table to be able to communicate those needs back, or needs to be talking to the people who are at the table on a regular basis, and their viewpoints and their expertise needs to be taken as expertise.
So it's kind of like building an application. You can't tack on security or reliability at the end. You have to have the voice of the developer in the entire process, and the people that, exactly, a developer relations professional is out there bringing that voice of the developer, the voice of the user, the voice of the customer into those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So
part of,
sorry,
I was just gonna add one more little thing on there.
Please do.
Part of the hard thing about that is that, and this goes back to what's the difference between just being a developer or being in marketing or being in product and switching to Devrel, we have to be able to speak that language, because we have to be able to say, cool, here's the feedback that the community member gave me. How do I translate that and make that make sense to someone in product, someone in engineering, and someone in marketing? And how do I voice that differently to each of those people? Because I know all of those different departments have different priorities. So how do we bring it all back together and meet this person's need?
Yeah, and when we talk about the business value and keys to your success, a lot of what I hear when you start talking about those and using those terms is, how are we going to measure that? We have to have some objective measures to answer the question, like what is the state of our developer relations? How as a person who's doing developer relations, do you know that you are actually having an impact? How do you measure those things, Mary?
Right. You have now entered into the most common question of developer relations. And the hard thing is, and I highly doubt anyone's going to like this answer, but honestly, it depends a lot on your company, right? Those end goals, those end metrics, there isn't here's the golden ticket, here's the silver bullet that will help all of the things, because each company is going to have different goals. Each company is going to have a different way to look at that. But one of the things that I found works for every company across the board, and how you represent this might be different, but keeping track of those handoffs that you're making, keeping track of the feedback that you're passing along, keeping track of the community member that you passed off to marketing who would be a great candidate to write a blog post. And I call these warm handoffs. So it's this idea of, I'm not closing the deal. I'm not responsible for the sale. I'm not responsible for the person getting hired. So I'm not responsible for the recruiting metrics, but I can pass off a community member to recruiting when I know that that community member might be really good for the engineering position or the product position that we have available. And so keeping track of those handoffs as you make them, making sure that you are the connector, you're the hub of the wheel, right? Not the spoke. You're connecting all of the various spokes, and your job as a result is to make sure that you are making those successful connections, and then the follow through is up to the other departments. So I think that's one of the basic metrics that fits for every company, no matter what your goal is. But there's a couple different resources that I point out in the book as well, ways to figure out what your specific goals should be based on the company goals, and kind of how to work it out from there.
A conversation I've been having a lot lately is, I think there's a misperception in a lot of companies that community is a nice thing to do. That, I mean, there's nothing, not to say there's anything wrong with charity, but community is not charity. It's a critical part of the business, because if people aren't using your software, if they're not talking about it, if they don't know how to use it, your business bottom line is going to suffer.
Right. And I think that's something that a lot of places aren't realizing, right? Like, and part of the hard thing is there's Devrel and community are all buzzwords right now. And so people go, oh, we have to have a developer advocate. We have to have a Devrel team. And they get this team in there, and then they go, okay, you're now responsible for these items. It's like, well, that's great, but how is that going to contribute to the bettering of the community? How is that going to help make sure that the community is successful, which then makes the product successful? And it's a symbiotic relationship, right? If the community is more successful, the company will be more successful. And if the company is more successful, then the community will be more successful. And I think both sides of that have to be considered with any conversations that are had, with any decisions that are made, which goes back to having a voice at the table, or at least having the ear of someone who does have a voice at the table.
So if I'm someone who has listened to this episode or has seen folks that are in this space of developer relations or developer advocacy, and I feel like that's something that I could do. That's something that really interests me. I think I could bring a lot of value. How do I get started in a role like that?
So there's a couple suggestions that I have. First is kind of give it a trial run, and not in the sense that you go applying for these jobs and you try one for a few months and decide whether or not you like it, but pick up some of the responsibilities at your own company that you're at currently. So if you're an engineer and you aren't sure if you're going to enjoy writing or speaking or those types of things, reach out to your marketing team, reach out to the rest of the engineers and say, hey, is there a topic you'd like to see for the blog? I'd like to write something, or I'm working on this really cool project. Could I write about it for the blog and get some help and mentorship figuring out, was that a good blog post? How do I write things better in the future? Check and see if there's speaking engagements. Look at the meetups in your area and see if there's one that's looking for speakers, because there are always ones that are looking for speakers. But reach out and see, and kind of get your feet wet with a talk or two or a blog post or two, and see if you enjoy those types of things. And then while at those meetups or while attending a conference, start talking to some of the community members. Start talking to, people who show up at the booth at a conference that your team is sponsoring, and see if you enjoy having those conversations. Because by getting your feet wet, you're allowing yourself to kind of give it a trial run, but you're also helping out your marketing team. You're also helping out your product team. You're helping out your company as a whole with promotional items, or spreading the word about how well you're doing with particular things and how you're meeting the community's needs, excuse me. So I think that's a good start. There's also a lot of great resources. I run the Devrel weekly newsletter that kind of highlights some of the basics of Devrel, as well as some good content that came out in the previous week about what's going on in the developer relations industry right now. And then there's a Devrel Slack team. And right now we have it closed to people who are doing Devrel on a day-to-day basis. But on the website, we have a lot of developer relations resources for people who are what we call Devrel curious. So if you go to devrelcollective.fun, you can find those resources there.
Awesome. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, mixing being a full-time engineer while also doing advocacy work is something I have a lot of experience in, and I've done it. I mean, I won't say I've ever found the balance between them because I don't think that exists. But it's immensely powerful if you are an engineer to develop your skills, because speaking skills can be developed, writing skills can be developed. It takes effort, but you can learn how to do them effectively. Combining that with technical skills is an immensely powerful combination. When you are at a conference, speaking at a conference, and someone comes up to you with their laptop and says, "Hey, I have some questions about this," sitting down and coding with them, making that deep personal connection while you're doing that technical activity, because I mean, coding is personal. We pretend it's not impersonal, but it's not. It is personal. People who make a personal connection with using your products, the process of using your product or using things that interact with your product, are going to want to use that product for a very long time.
Agreed.
Absolutely. I think it's, I will just sort of echo a little bit of what you said there as well, Mary, around the Devrel collective. I think that, there are lots of people that take developer relations as their profession. It is a thing that we as a collective body are building practices around, and are also in absolutely building a community around that practice. So I'm in that Slack channel, and I see a lot of sharing that's happening. And I know I get on regular hangouts with other people that don't work at the same company I do, but have the same role that I do. And we talk about the practice of developer relations. We talk about the things that we're out there doing. So if that's something that you're doing, I absolutely encourage you to be a participant within this community.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, this has been a super great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mary.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
Fantastic to have you here.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
All right. Well, this is the point in the show where we go to our picks. So the picks is a moment for each one of our panelists in turn to share an item or two that they think our audience might be interested in. Nell, do you want to start today?
I would be happy to. My first pick, I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before, but a while ago I was looking to replace my Evernote note-taking application with something that, number one, I could use Markdown with, and number two, I could use Vim-based shortcuts with. So after some recommendations from coworkers, I found Quiver. Quiver allows me to easily take my notes in Markdown, and we will put a link to that in the show notes. It allows me to create code snippets easily and use Vim key bindings in those code snippets. And what I think the best part of it is it lets me back up all of my notes to Dropbox. So I can easily access all of my notes from my work computer, from my home computer. I've found I learn something better when I'm taking notes on it. But if I take them in longhand, I always lose the notebook. However, if they live in Dropbox, I'm always going to be able to access them anywhere. My second pick is a game I played a little while ago called Gone Home. I was a little late to this. This game came out in 2013. It was by far the most emotionally engaging and deeply, deeply moving game that I've ever experienced. The way I describe it is, I played it in one sitting, which is unusual. Though it's a 4-hour game, you can play it in one sitting. But after the credits were rolling after the game, I couldn't move. That's how deeply connected I was with what was going on. So if you haven't played it, I highly encourage you to. And it also recently came out for the Nintendo Switch. So you can play it on PC, you can play it on PS4, Switch. Just check it out. And how about over to you, Mary?
Sure. So a book that I've been diving into lately as I'm kind of trying to figure out next steps with my business and prioritizing things before the end of the year. It's called The One Thing. And it's been great for just kind of helping me recognize, what the all important question of what's the one thing that only I can do. And I think it's important for those of us in Devrel as well, because we have a tendency to get pulled in so many directions and so many different departments because we can kind of fit into those. But asking, what's the one thing that I can do? What's the one thing that Devrel can do? What's the one thing that only, I have the particular whether it's skills or resources or connections to be able to accomplish. But it's been helping me a lot with my consulting business, to reprioritize my topics, as well as my personal life, to reprioritize things as the year winds up and as it gets busier with the holidays and everything else. So that's been good. Oh, and the other thing, I knew there was something else, not just the one thing. But with TV shows and relaxing, if you aren't familiar with The Good Place, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's been making the rounds of recommendations on Twitter and things lately as well. But it's a fantastic, just 20, 25-minute long sitcom that releases weekly. I think they're on season 3 right now. And it's a great mix of thought-provoking conversations and hilarious scripts. And just, it's incredibly well written, but it's also just a really good thought-provoking show. So I'd highly encourage you to check that out if you're looking for stuff to watch during your downtime through the holidays.
Awesome. And I'll go next for picks. I have 2 today. The first is an awesome podcast that my good friend Robert Treat told me about. It's called the Broken Record Podcast. It's by Malcolm Gladwell and the person who started DevOps, which isn't Patrick Dubois. I'm sorry, Patrick, I love you. But it's Malcolm Gladwell and Rick Rubin. And so Rick Rubin talks in the very first episode, which admittedly is the only one I've listened to, but it was super awesome because Rick Rubin talked about his journey as a music producer. If you don't know Rick Rubin, he's the producer behind the Beastie Boys, and importantly and near and dear to my heart, he's the producer who brought together Aerosmith and Run DMC to collaborate on Walk This Way, which is why I truly believe that he is the founder of DevOps, because that's where the movement started right there. So that's my first pick. It's called The Broken Record by Malcolm Gladwell and Rick Rubin. It's a podcast, super fun. My second pick is an amazing wine that I had the opportunity to drink last night. A very good friend of mine, Mathilde Barr, her family owns a vineyard in California. And I've known this for years, but have never been able to get my hands on a bottle of bar wine. But I had a bottle last night. I highly recommend the Dane Head. It was a 2013. It's a mix. It was absolutely delicious. So before we close out, one of the things that we always like to do also is make sure that everyone knows where we, the panelists, can be found. So you can find me online at Twitter. I'm at Nathan Harvey. It's NathenHarvey. And then in the real world, I'll be in New York for a couple of days next week. If you're around New York City, let me know. And then following that, I'll be at Seattle for KubeCon. So I hope to see a bunch of our listeners there, whether at KubeCon or just in Seattle. That'll do it for my travel for the year, which I'm kind of looking forward to another 3 or 4 weeks at home, which would be awesome. Mary, how about you? Where can we find you online or in real life?
Sure. So online, you can find me on Twitter, Mary_Grace is where I'm at there. As far as travel, I am home for the rest of the year in San Francisco, which is fantastic. It feels so good. I actually have no travel booked right now, which is a little bit weird and a little bit surreal and also awesome. But I'm looking forward to probably hitting up the East Coast, New York, and places early next year. So keep an eye out on Twitter, Mary_Grace, to figure out where I'm at and where you can meet up with me.
Awesome. We can find me on Twitter at Nell Shamrell. That's NELLSHAMRELL. In real life, I am also home here in Seattle for the rest of the year. I won't be at KubeCon, the con itself, but I would love to meet up with anyone who's in Seattle and wants to talk food fight, chef, DevOps, Kubernetes, whatever have you. So just drop me a line on Twitter and we'll see what we can arrange. All right. Well, thank you, both Mary and Nathan, so much for being here with me today. And this will likely be our last episode of the year. As we were talking about before the show, the holidays are coming up where many people take time off. And part of that is you have to get all the planning done for the new year before people go on vacation. So I think for all of us are going to have a pretty full schedule, but we are looking forward to coming back in 2019. If there are topics you are interested in hearing about or want to hear us address, you can reach out to us in the Food Fight channel in the Chef Community Slack, or tweet at either me or Nathan individually, or at our Twitter account, which is at Food Fight Show. And with that, we're going to close out the show now. Have a wonderful holiday, everybody, and keep it hot.